Linear effects are great ways to quickly and easily get dynamic effects on stage without having to dig through a table as in an absolute or a step-based effect. So to create that new effect, I'm going to open my effect editor, create effect 809, and make it a linear effect. Our default linear effect here is this sine wave. We've looked at this in another video, but if I was to apply this to, say, our top blades there, you can see we have this nice, smooth, mathematical sine wave as it fades up to 25% above its current value and fades down smoothly to 25% below its current value. And again, this 25% above and 25% below is dictated by the scale. So if I increase the scale to 50%, we're actually going to see this smoothly fade from 0 to full to 0. One nice thing about linear effects, particularly when using something like this sine wave, is we kind of get a little bit of built-in easing as we get to the top and as we get to the bottom. So it's not an abrupt 90-degree angle up there. We kind of slow down a little bit as we get to the top, and then we speed up and we slow down a little bit as we get to the bottom. We can go ahead and we can change this graph in a couple of ways. Right now, this is what I would call an above the line and a below the line graph, which meaning it's going 50% above our baseline and 50% below our baseline, as dictated by our scale. I can go ahead and I can change this by tapping on Edit in our graph editor, and then I have a bunch of tools at my disposal. Working with the default form, I can move this form up and down. So you see we have some tools: Draw, Select, Move, Form, and Gamma. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink this form down. So I'm going to choose my form, and I can actually either use my finger on the screen or my scale vertical encoder, and I'm just going to shrink it down. And I'm going to use my Move tab here, and I'm going to move this vertically. And what I want is I want this to just occupy from the top of the graph to the bottom, to the baseline. So something like that. So now, this is what I would call an above the line form. I'm going to go ahead and click Apply to lock this in. If you don't click Apply, you're going to lose your changes. So make sure you hit Apply. And now I have this waveform that is only working above the line. This is beneficial when I want to be able to set floors for my intensity values. So I'm still running this chase here. I'm going to grab my top blades. I'm going to set them at 25%. And now these lights are going from 25% up to whatever our scale is. So in this case, our scale, I believe, is 50. So it's going 25, 75, back to 25. Whereas before, we were going a scale's worth above and below our baseline. Now, I'm just going above. So that lets me use my background state as a bottom and my scale as a top. So if I wanted, for example, if I wanted this to go between 25 and 35%, I wanted it to be a very subtle flicker, maybe it's on a star drop or something like that, I can come in here and I can just make my scale 10. And now I'm just going to fluctuate between 25 and 35 because I'm using my background state as a floor and my scale as a ceiling. Vice versa, I can do it the other way if I move this below the line. So I'm going to go into my form editor again. I'm going to grab Move. I'm going to move this down until it is just, the top of it is just touching our baseline here. So now this form exists completely below the line, which means that when I touch this baseline, I'm going to be at wherever my light currently is, and then I'm going to use my scale to set my floor. I'm going to go ahead and hit Apply. And we notice right away how our lights seem to have gotten dimmer, our output, because we're no longer going above the line, we're existing solely below the line. So if I select these pixels, I put them at 40%, I come into my effect editor and I change my scale to 20, I am now running a chase between 20% and 40%, where 40% is my ceiling or my max, because it's that baseline, and 20% is my baseline minus my scale, so 20 points. So this is a good way, again, to squish stuff in. And which one you want to use will depend on your application, because all of these will interact with HTTP submasters and all the other things we can pile in different ways. So sometimes below the line effects are great for busking, because if the fixture is off, it won't be outputting, right? If it's above the line and the fixture is off, say the submaster is down, you'll still be seeing all that above the line stuff. But the low line is nice because if it's at 0, so if we take these fixtures and bring them to 0, they're not actually going to output at all, even though the effect is still running. One thing to be aware of with below the line effects, however, is it's going to continue to run that sine wave regardless of the current values of the lights. So for example, if I bring these lights up to, say, 10%, notice we have this large dark spot now, because it is continuing to run that sine wave 20 points below our baseline, even though that is, in this case, it would be -10. If the lights are at 10, it goes 10 down 20 points, which is -10, which is off, and up 20 points. That gap that we're seeing on these fixtures here is actually the time that exists between when this sine wave hits 0 for the light and when it reemerges from that 0 point for the light. So I'm going to stash this away. I'm going to label it below the line sine. I'm going to stop this effect from running. Stop effect enter will stop all of my effects that are running.